Hi everyone, and welcome back to another review in this series focusing on electronic music technology that is particularly important in terms of a lot of my musical practices and sound experiments. So today we have the very innovative Ellitone Multi-Synth. Absolutely by far one of my favorite synthesizers, including all my Eurorack and even my Lyra 8. It's an amazing synthesizer because it's super affordable. You can find it on websites like Etsy, perhaps other sites as well. It's made by a very small company, and it's a semi-modular synthesizer that has actually a lot of features for its price point. You have some controls here in terms of buttons, you have 4 dials, and then you have the semi-modular setup that allows you to patch the 6 different sounds or waveforms that you can achieve with the multi-synth. For me, it's one of my favorite synthesizers to use in my small desktop microenvironments synthesizer series. So for me, it's very versatile because of its size and also some of the really cool experimental sounds that you can make with it. So in our review today, we'll talk about the Ellitone, its basic functions, how it's powered, which is using a USB cable, the output jack, some of the patching points in here, what things do, and we'll go through each of the 6 modes that allow you to create some really dazzling and spectacular cool sounds from this super small synthesizer. So let's take a look now. Okay, well, in terms of the unboxing of the Ellitone, the multi-synth, there isn't a lot to the unboxing experience, and obviously I've had this synth for a while, and I'm sure the box is in the garage. It doesn't come with any fancy documentation. It comes with 5 patch cables, and you might note there are different types of patch cables out there. These might be the types I received with the Volca modular, and they have a little shorter barrel on them, so they're easier to patch, because anytime you're getting into DuPont cables, you are certainly getting into the issue of trying to fit things in a small space and sometimes missing the hole there. So you can certainly use either type of DuPont cable, the square end or this that has the much narrower end. As you get into the terminal here in the middle, it does get a little tricky to patch things occasionally, so it's something certainly to consider. The Ellitone, as you'll discover in this video, the Ellitone Multi-Synth, I would classify it as an experimental synthesizer. It has a patch bay which controls a variety of functions. You'll always want to remember that the very middle patch bay, so 2 over, 3 over from left or 3 over from right, will always select the mode. There is a patch sheet that you could download. It's available in the Google Drive document, and it has the 6 modes. So unpatched is mode 1, which is wavetable, and I go through these in just a bit, so you can wait for that section. But this will help you with really understanding the controls. In a lot of cases, you'll use the knobs here for pitch control, although in some of the synthesis modes, these take on different functions. You also have the 4 buttons at the bottom, which in some cases could be seen as sequencer buttons that allow you to select a pitch, and then you can change that pitch up top. So there's some paralleling between the 4 knobs and then the 4 buttons, but not exactly in every case. And then again, using our patch points beyond that middle terminal, and you would use, again, these to select your modes of synthesis. So mode 1 is unpatched, 2 is here, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then what you can do is, again, read those patch sheets, and if this one controls the envelope or the speed, you could begin to patch that in different places and see what happens. You can also patch the instrument experimentally across these 6 headers, and in this way it really reminds me much less of either the Castle 1.5 or the vocal modular, and more of my folk tech gear. We're talking about the conduit module, we're talking about matter, and also the mescaline, which has 3 big modules. Whenever I'm working with my folk tech gear, there's a sense of doing exactly this. Doing a patch and saying, what the hell is going to happen? Am I going to get a percussive sound? Will I get a drone? Will I get a weird modulation? So that interaction between the different points using your DuPont cables as you continue to patch and patch across the instrument, for me, is really what makes it like a much smaller version, if you will, of, say, the Folktech mescaline, which is really an instrument that is prone to experimentalism. And that's in contrast with something like the Bassel and Casper Electronics Ohm Synth, where if you try that approach, as I've tried here unsuccessfully, to patch things up and to try to figure out what to put where, you're often not going to get any sound at all. And that's what's cool about the Ellitone Multi-Synth, as the designer says on the website, is anyone without any knowledge of synthesis can begin to have fun, patch some things together, and really take it in new places. If you compare it to the vocal modular is much more trying to be like it's semi-modular, but it's trying to be like a modular system where you have traditional blocks that can affect one another. You can do certainly a lot of experimental stuff here with the vocal modular as well. So that ability to take the multi-synth and to patch and try some different things out, I think is what really makes it remarkable in my mind. One of my main uses, my primary use, is to create experimental soundscapes, glitchy sequences that you'll hear quite a few of these, particularly in my sound demo of Abstraction 6, and then also my demo of the pipe at C, where I was using this as an experimental box that was playing a constant rhythm that I put through some effects units, including some of the ones here, and also my Dude mixer and my very small performance setup that you'll see at the end of that sonic example of the pipe at C. So for me, this was like my accompaniment. It was my band in the box that was allowing me to create an evolving soundscape that certainly had has similarities to like the Buchla uncertainty module that in some ways gets replicated in the Voltage Research Labs modular, semi-modular synth, which I happen to own from Pittsburgh Modular. So that sense of evolving rhythms and glitches, and even sort of shifting through wavetables, what it sounds like to me, at least in some of the demos I've laid out for you. That is what was so attractive about this synth, is to be able to create those kinds of sonic soundscapes that I could use in some experimental work. It certainly has limitations, as we'll talk throughout this video, but so does every piece of gear here. So I think when you listen to demos online, think about what exactly do you want to get out of a synth like the Ellitone Multi-Synth or any other gear here. The other one that comes to mind is the 4060, the Ellitron, which does some similar things. Doesn't have the sonic potential of, say, the either the Castle or the Ellitone Multi-Synth, but you can do so much more similar to the Ohm Synth in terms of prototyping, using LEDs, and creating incredibly interesting and glitchy sounds. Again, one of the things I'll mention throughout this video is with something like the Ellitron, with something like all the Vocas really have some ability for syncing, at least some simple clock signals. With something like the Castle, you can do sync in and out. So what you can do with the Ellitron and the Castle in terms of syncing with external gear, you cannot do with the Ellitone Multi-Synth. Not necessarily a big issue. Again, you have to really think about how you want to use this instrument in your setup, more so than thinking about some of those limitations that we could talk about with any module or any piece of gear that we have. Now, another thing just to note here with the unboxing is you will get, I think it comes with a cable. I have so many of these in my home, I don't even remember, but it's one of these USB. It's not the newer Type C, it's that fatter version. Is that version 1 or 2, A or B? I'm forgetting that. But it has the power then right here. You can see it here. You could plug this into a USB charger. And one of the things I did, it's off screen, you can't see it, is I picked up, because a lot of my gear uses USB power, including the Korg NTS-1. So I got a mini power block that has 4 USB cable extenders in there, and then I can just power all my gear with that. It's set up to my giant power strip on the wall. So it's kind of handy. You could also charge this or use this off of a small power brick, and I've done that in performances, so you could power it that way if you wanted to do a desktop synthesis thing or performance. The other thing to keep in mind is you will need, if you try to plug a mono cable out, you're not likely going to get any sound, and so you could just simply use one of these splitters that takes a stereo. This is not in stereo, but you can certainly take it, the signals, and run it through any kind of stereo filter, stereo sound device, effects unit, a reverb, a delay unit, and you can get some really incredible panning effects and stereophonic effects. So that is never really a limitation with any of our gear. We can always do stuff in post-production or using effects units to create stereo separation, do some interesting things. So definitely pick up that if you are having issues with the sound coming out. I'll mention this later. If you wanted to, you could mod our knobs here if you wanted to make them a little bigger. I find these a little fiddly. I did that with some of my Bastel gear, although in the case of the mixer it works great. In the case of the Castle 1.5, the disadvantage is these get better and easier to use, but then I can't patch my patch points. And this is really small to patch, so that is always an issue when we're working with DuPont cables. Again, you'll get 5 with the multi-synth, but it's always a little fiddly to try to patch these in a way, particularly if you have big fingers or big hands or something like that. So that's the unboxing. There isn't a lot to it. It's very simple what you get in the package. Again, you can go to Etsy and get more information about all the sound modes. You can get some great demos, and just go to YouTube as well and type in Ellitone Multi-Synth, and you'll probably find 20, 30 different demo videos of this very cool synthesizer. All right, so now we can talk a little bit about features of the Ellitone, and I'm going to just unplug it here. So when you think about this synthesizer and what it does remind me of some other gear on the market. And this is not an exclusive list here by any means, but in terms of the form factor, in terms of the use of the DuPont cables for patching of sounds, certainly in terms of, I would say, the sounds it produces, and some of the potentials to work with the synth in terms of using the various parameters of the knobs and the buttons and also the patching points. It does remind me of some other experimental gear out there. So the one that certainly comes to mind is the Bastel Castle 1.5, and it's certainly one of my favorite synths, and I've actually modified this synth here a little bit. It makes it hard to patch, but I find sometimes these little teeny knobs, like the ones on the Ellitone, to be a little hard to work with. And by all means, if you wanted to, you could do a modification. You could get some guitar or stomp box knobs, and as long as there's clearance, you could put those on there. I've seen a few examples of that on YouTube in some of the demos that I was watching to get a sense of what people were doing with their Ellitones. So like the Castle, it has the opportunities to use the DuPont cables to do patching. The difference with the Castle, I think, is, this is much smaller, runs on 3 AA batteries, has the same approach to patching, much different sound. You can do sequenced material. Certainly you can use the LFO, and it has the in and the out, which is patchable, so that makes it really nice. And again, for a lot of this gear, you probably do want to pick up one of these cables that is going to take your stereo mini jack out to a splitter. A lot of these, including the Ellitone, you have to use that in order to work with it. The same case would be with the Korg NTS-1. So in terms of the Castle, of course, the patchability is very similar. Sound is quite different, and I think what makes it really different from the Ellitone is the clocking ability. So that, I think, is the one key feature that that is different with the Ellitone. Again, using the Dude mixer along with the Castle for a desktop setup, as you've seen in some of my experiments, can be really useful. You could combine certainly the Ellitone with small effects pedals. Again, using a few converter cables or using a small mixer like the Dude could be really nice because it has the 5 inputs. You would think it'd be 4, it's 5. You can combine a number of these synths here and really go crazy in terms of your sonic explorations. Another set of synthesizers, just in terms of size, that I'm reminded of would be, of course, the Korg Little Bits, which I've used a lot, and I will be doing a full featured review and demo. Little Bits are, I think, quite interesting for me because they do some things that are just so unique, and the form factor, the fact that they are modular in a literal physical sense where you can attach them is pretty interesting. So those also come to mind. The Ellitone 4060 also comes to mind, but again, very different. It's kind of redundant saying these are all different because they are different, but there's similarity, of course, in terms of the patching, in terms of some of the sounds that you get. The Ellitone is actually super powerful in terms of being able to use electronic components, which we'll talk about here with the Ohm Synth, which is another cool, more prototyping synthesizer from Bastel and Casper Electronics. In the case of the Ellitone, of course, you can use LEDs, you can use resistors, you're using DuPont patch cables, the same type of system, and you have some real powerful abilities to come in and out of the instrument. That, again, I think is the one thing that is missing on the Ellitone that, again, would change the price point and so forth. And again, you don't have to be confined to just using clock signals or synchronization in terms of your musical experiments. So the Ellitone also comes to mind. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion on YouTube about patching different synthesizers that have the DuPont cables, like a ton of my Folk Tech gear, which is off screen here. Certainly the danger in doing any of that is, you want to be worried about blowing something out if the voltages don't match up. So I don't typically work with that. There also is the need to ground the different instruments. You get that certainly with the Folk Tech mescaline when you are often running DuPont cables into other modules. But that's kind of a little off track. But the 4060 is certainly in that same wheelhouse. I would say that the Vocal Modular by Korg also comes to mind. This is the one instrument I really need to experiment with a little more. It's sort of been sitting on a shelf, and I just continually find the timbral, like just the sound quality of this instrument, just there's something about it. It sounds very like limited to a certain frequency spectrum in terms of the sounds that come out, and also it sounds like it has a very ring modulated tone. I don't know what it is about this instrument, but so this is one that I should come back to, but certainly there's a lot of power in this instrument in terms of sequencing, in terms of all the patching that you can do, which is more approaching the idea of semi-modular synthesis, like with the Folk Tech mescaline, other instruments out there, Kilpatrick Audio. I used to have their very wonderful synthesizer that also has, the ability to do a ton of patching in a semi-modular format. Of course, the No Coast also comes to mind in that realm. Now, when you get into the No Coast realm, you're talking $500 again versus $100 here. The Castle, they all come in around $100. The Ellitone a little over that. Sometimes in the used gear market, you could get much cheaper. Now, the Ohm Synth by Bastel and Casper Electronics also comes to mind, but this is more of a prototyping experimental machine. And I have to say I've been trying and struggling because I'm not good at electronics to figure the sucker out. I should probably take the battery out at some point here. But I haven't quite mastered this instrument. But it's another one that certainly is reminiscent, but this is more taking into the realm of actually doing prototyping and circuits and getting into that realm. And of course, we could immediately, with the Daisy Patch, which I happened to pick up for my Eurorack, that little small chip, which is programmable, that could be another way to really work in a small format and to create sounds maybe similar to some of this gear. And of course, our old friend, the Korg NTS-1. I know a lot of you have this piece of gear that is certainly a great synthesizer and an effects unit. I would say for what it does for the price, it's probably one of the most powerful pieces of gear on the market. And it patches very well, or rather pairs very well, with small synthesizer devices like the Ellitone. So in terms of the feature of the Ellitone, again, I think there's some, if I were going to talk about like a Venn diagram, there's certainly some relationship between these instruments. part of that is because of their size. Another part of that is because of the patching system that's using the DuPont cables. And of course, by using such small cables, you don't have to have a large format instrument that would take up more desk space. And that's what I think is really cool about the Ellitone. The other cool thing about the Ellitone is the fact, and I think it's a big deal, is to support small companies or just individuals who are making things. It's one of the great things about Etsy and sites like that, where people can develop their own gear, sell it, and actually make a really good market of it, and we can get some incredibly unique synthesizers, effects, or whatever. It's the total opposite of a big giant company like a Behringer that can sell us really cheap gear that presumably is manufactured in China and maybe made a little cheaper, but you're maybe losing some of that creativity. Now, that being said, Behringer, by releasing so many instruments, so many modules, I actually have 2 of their Eurorack modules for my setup here. They also are providing opportunity to do experimental music, to also create opportunities for us to own instruments like the forthcoming 2600, the ARP that many of us never dreamed of owning. So there's some value certainly in the big companies as well. But in terms of these small companies, the folks behind Ellitone, which is, I think, one individual, I could be mistaken, it's just great to be able to see that this kind of development is happening and can be sold through platforms that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. I know they also have, and I can just put up the Ellitone website here so you can also just, take a look at it and see what they're up to. They have the E64, which looks really cool and experimental, comes in at a little higher price point. But I think it's really great to see people developing gear like this. And if you look at the Ellitone, if you had a chance to see it online, it's well constructed. It's not fancy in terms of aesthetics, but that's great because then the price point is lower and you're just really concerned about the sound and not about how the thing looks. I think sometimes, some gear has a really cool look to it, like this mini crush bit crusher and modulator pedal, but does it really have to look like, I don't know what it's trying to look like, some kind of vintage 1950s thing? Kind of cool, but an instrument doesn't always have to have like an aesthetic appeal for it to be very functional in our space. So I guess what I'd say in terms of the features of the instrument, you're going to get the entire walkthrough when I go through the 6 modes. You're going to hear the sonic examples. I would say that this instrument, I think, is geared for a certain type of music. I'd be curious to hear folks out there who are using it in ways that are maybe beyond or different from what I've used it for in some of my sonic demos. Again, I'm not saying it's only geared for experimental music, but I think that's the sound that resonates the most. I was just today playing through as many YouTube demos of the Ellitone as I could get, just to get a sense of what people were doing. And indeed, sounded very similar to my musical work here that I'm showing you today, in that it really lent itself more towards experimentalism and harsh timbres and tones and rhythmic sequences that are really more in line, I think, with experimental music than, say, ambient music or techno or, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine someone using an Ellitone in a reggae band, but you never know. I mean, stranger things have happened for sure. Again, some other tips, I guess, in terms of features is you're really primarily focused on using the sounds. There's a huge palette of sounds available just by going through and patching and unpatching. Again, one of my great tips, it's not really that great of a tip, or a tip I would just suggest to you, is just to say that you should just experiment with patching and see where that takes you. It's that level of experimentalism and aleatoric approach that I think really resonates with me in terms of why I've grown so accustomed to working with these instruments in the ways that they are, how they sound, how sound is produced, how we think about approaches to composition and so forth. So just going around and experimenting with the patch points is a really fun place to start. You don't have to look at the patch sheets necessarily in terms of seeing what you're even doing. Experiment, fiddle with things. You're not going to damage anything. And I think it's an approach that you can take that will lead you maybe down some interesting sonic pathways. And certainly as you watch this video, comment in the comments about how you're using the Ellitone in your own setup, because I'm always curious about what you're doing and how you use it in terms of engaging with your other effects pedals, your other desktop synthesizers, your small mixers, devices like the Korg NTS-1, modular gear and other gear out there. So yeah, it's just a great opportunity to remind ourselves that with something like the Ellitone Multi-Synth, you can really use it in some ways that are particularly powerful, experimental, and again, cost-effective because the price is very low in my mind, and also a space saver in terms of being able to use it in a small desktop setup like this one here. Okay, so what I thought we would do is we would start with just going over the 6 modes of the Ellitone Multi-Synth. And I think it would be really handy just as a recommendation if you download the patch sheets that are available on the Google Drive, because I find it not that intuitive in terms of patching and trying to remember what everything is in terms of all the functions and the 6 sound modes. Now, that being said, there of course is a value to using synthesizers or equipment, say not unlike some of my folk tech gear, in a way that is more like aleatoric and random in nature, such that you don't exactly know what you're doing. Other modules, I'm thinking of my Make Noise Morphogene, has a very similar approach where you discover things by tweaking and turning and patching and repatching in such a way that you're not necessarily knowing from the beginning what your goal is in terms of the sound, but you discover it kind of through that organic process of just working through the sounds itself. So that being said, again, what I would recommend is to really look at these patch sheets because it gives you a sense of the 6 modes. So to go over these, if you have nothing patched, you have a simple wavetable mode. And it can get a little confusing if you look at the diagram, because the way I see mode 1 is a drone synthesizer. Keep in mind this is mono, not stereophonic. So when we go through the first mode 1, which is the wavetables, you can select the 4 notes, but these cannot play simultaneously as with a drone synthesizer where maybe you have 4 knobs to control 4 different oscillators. Mode 2 will be patterns. Mode 3 is frequency modulation. Mode 4 is chirp. Mode 5, infinite bounds. And mode 6 is panic voice. In a lot of these cases, there's some sharing of functions, some paralleling of functions across the different sections of the synthesizer. So you have the 4 buttons here, and in some ways you can think of this as a 4-step sequencer or a synthesizer with 4 separate pitches depending on the mode, again, monophonic. You can think of this section here as your patch bay that will either select the mode, which is always that middle patch bay, and again, you can look at that, the mode select, so it's the 3rd one in the middle of the 5, 3 from either side, of course. There is some keeping of similar function across that patch bay, so waveform select typically is always, not always, in most cases, waveform select will be the first slot. If you go to frequency mod, mode 3, that becomes FM intensity. So it's not always the case that every patch will have the same function, and that certainly reminds me of some of my folk tech gear where depending on how you patch things, all of a sudden something sounds entirely different or has a different function in terms of rhythm or something like that. And then you have to really experiment with the 6 terminals here, which you will use your DuPont cables, which some people love or hate them. I saw someone actually cloned for a much higher price the Ellitone, and the source code, by the way, is openly available. So presumably with Arduino, you could do something and create this synthesizer on your own. But someone, I guess, is selling a version of this on Instagram for much more using banana cables because they don't like the DuPont cables. DuPont cables, I think, are a subject of much debate. Some people love them, some people hate them. The one thing that happens with any DuPont gear, including all my folk tech stuff, including the Castle synth, which we'll talk about, is it's always super hard to work with. And so if you're patching stuff, particularly in the folk tech case, sometimes you cannot get in and patch an adjacent terminal because you're just working with so much small real estate. So that does become a little bit annoying, but again, in terms of the price point of the synthesizer, I think it's a small price to have to pay. But you can certainly experiment with different combinations. And again, you could just throw out these patch sheets and not even use them if you want to just be experimental and find something that sounds good and then kind of work from there. And I think that's always a nice place to begin, particularly if you're doing experimental music. But what we'll do now is let's just go through the modes. We're not going to dial down too much in depth, and you get a sense then of what this will sound like. Totally dry signal here. And just have it coming out here into my mixer, recording it, so we're not going to get fancy. And some of the other sound examples in this video, we will look at adding effects to the Ellitone. Again, there's nothing you can really do at this time. I mean, maybe in the future, I don't know, with new source code or something, where you could do something like gate signals or triggers. A few people have asked for that, I know, on one of the YouTube demos that Ellitone provides. So yeah, if we begin with the first one, it's mode 1, which is a wavetable mode. Nothing is patched in. So if we, we'll have to see which pitch is rolling here. I think it's number 1. And again, these will be your 4 pitch or note selectors. So we'll just dial that up. It's very low. And you hear the pitch. Now again, it's monophonic, so if I do the other pitch knobs, nothing is going to happen. I can switch to pitch 2. I have a different pitch. And I suppose if you wanted to, you could, program some kind of scale or something like this. You're not going to get any Rachmaninoff playing here on these buttons, but you get the idea. We could do our third pitch. And then our fourth one. And you can kind of get a sense of the range. That is that mode. So you have basic wavetable synthesis. Now with the next mode is patterns. You get the wavetables, but you add the sequencing. So the key, if we use our diagram, is again, we're always going to patch to select the mode of the synthesis, the middle terminal. And we can just go through that now. You'll hear how different these are. So what happens is for mode 2, again, mode 1 is unpatched. Mode 2 will be always patched starting at this terminal. So 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you can just hear that right now. We'll go through the first one and then you'll move along. So this is mode 2, sequences, mode 3, frequency mod. Mode 4, and I have to use my cheat sheet because I don't have these memorized, is chirp mode. Mode 5 will be infinite bounce. You can see either terminal is the same selector. And then the last one is panic voice, which is a pretty cool one. So we'll go back to our first mode, which will be our sequenced wavetables. And then again, using our patch sheet, I think it makes it a lot easier to figure out what is going on. Now in this case, because the sequencer is playing, again, a 4-note sequencer, we're able to adjust the patches on the, or the pitches rather, on the fly. And again, you could just dial this in with your ear. It's like with a lot of modular, semi-modular gear, you're not really talking about getting perfect sequences maybe in terms of the notes or the progressions. Now, the other thing we can do with this one is see, in the case of mode 1, these were note selectors. Mode 2, that entirely changes, and this is kept, I believe, I'm just looking here if it's kept across a few of these. It actually isn't, so take that back. But the 4 buttons will have transpose down, transpose up, random step, and hold. So if we hit hold, we actually have to hold it down. It's like a freeze effect. And let's see if we... I think it's stopping it. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how it's doing the freeze. If I release this though, it'll continue. Okay, and I've changed the pitches a little bit, so the sequences has changed. We can transpose up or down. transpose up. And I can add a random step here. And I'm trying to listen on this one. So it appears to me that if you hold it down, you'll get that randomization. Again, I think one of the fun things with the Ellitone is that sense of discovery. You don't know exactly what's going on. There isn't a manual per se other than this information and maybe some stuff you'd find on Reddit or other sources in terms of people experimenting and trying to figure things out. So what we can do next then is, again, we're in mode 2, which is the sequence wavetables patterns. We could try to experiment using this guide here. So we know that the terminals, again, our middle terminal of the 5 is always going to select the mode. In this case, the waveform is selected with terminal 1, terminal 2 is the voicing, terminal 4 is rhythms, and speeds will be terminal 5. Let's start with terminal 5 to see the speed effect, because I think it'll be quite noticeable in this case. And we can experiment. Let's try patching in some different terminals. Okay. And so in a sense, it's creating like this syncopation, or it's changing up the rhythm depending on where I patch it. You see the different effects. And those two sound different. So it seems like you do get a different rhythmic effect depending on the patch there, in which of the two terminals. Although in that case, it sounds the same. It's interesting, right? We haven't changed anything. It appears to be changing over time as far as the rhythms that are produced. So really, like, you're starting to get a sense of how aleatoric or random some of the patching can be on this instrument. We can continue to patch, so if we wanted to, we could take... Oh, sorry, so I just realized this, I did patch it into the last terminal, which is 5. That is the rhythms, not the speed terminal. So we can actually go ahead and patch the speed one. And I apologize for that, but it's really hard to see these, and that's again one thing with DuPont cables. So this will be the speed terminal. You can see it really took down our BPMs quite a bit. And I was trying to see if there's any correlation of the location of the 6 dual terminals in terms of speed, but it seems like, again, maybe because the internal patching is happening with multiple patch points, we're getting, again, a lot of randomization happening. It's one of those instruments that you perhaps are not able to really figure out exactly what's happening, other than the general sense that if you patch, in this case terminal 5, you're going to get a rhythmic change. Terminal 4, you'll get a speed change of some sort. We can also take the waveform terminal and experiment with patching in some different locations. Like a square wave there. And so what you're seeing is any patch point I make is changing the timbral sound of the voice. So this is why I think it really does promote experimentalism as opposed to conscious sort of, okay, I'm going to achieve this sound. It really involves a lot of patching and unpatching, which is really the semi-modular and modular experience, as you might know. We can also then change the pitches as we're going. And you see very quickly, with a couple patches, a couple changes of the knobs, or the buttons, pushes of the buttons, you're going to get radically different sounds, which is, I think, really cool about the synthesizer, something you don't find in a lot of other, is certainly within this price point between, you know, $70 and $100. As an example, the Korg Vocal Modular, I think, sounds very much, for me, it's very limited in its potentials in terms of how it sounds timbrally as compared to something like this or the Bastel Castle 1.5. And if we wanted to, we could patch some more. I was experimenting earlier, patching between blocks and not going into the header there, just to see what happens. And you see we're getting different effects in the sound. That's actually quite nice right there. Some of this I'm doing it for the video, but some of this I may sample because I just love some of these sequences and tones. It sounds at some level very Buchla-esque, you know, to me, which I love about it. I love that kind of effect. I get that a lot with my Voltage Research Lab synth from Pittsburgh Modular. But this is very usable material right here. If you just hear what kind of sounds we're getting out of this. Again, this is all dry signal, unaffected, so imagine throwing some lush reverb or some, I don't know, chorus or pitch shifting, creating a stereo effect perhaps. You could get some really interesting effects. I'm just loving how that sounds. I'm doing that random, and then the hold. And one of the things I would say is this certainly could become a staple maybe of your small synthesizer setup or your small performance setup, because I think you could do a lot very quickly with changing parameters or patch points, as long as you're open to a little bit of uncertainty in your performance. You could do this, I think, very effectively in a performance setting and get a lot of interesting rhythmic alterations. Now, again, keep in mind, one disadvantage is if you want to try to control signals coming in or out, probably not going to happen too much. I did experiment. This signal coming out, I notice, is at least communicating with my modular gear, which is a common issue of desktop synths and gear in the modular world. I couldn't use my attenuator modules to get the signal high enough to do any envelope following, but I'd be curious to hear out there if any of you have had success with that idea, so let me know in the comments if you have. So again, a lot of interesting sounds just coming out of patching a few points in our Mode 2 patterns. So let's go ahead and remove most of our patch points so we can try the next mode. So next mode will be frequency modulation. So to do this, we will patch in the second terminal. Okay. And as we experienced with mode 1, we're getting our 4 pitches. Again, this, if you press this button, pitch 3 is selected, but nothing will happen with 4 until you hit 4. Likewise with 2 and 1. Okay. So I patched in terminal 5, which, like our last one, is in this case rhythms and envelopes. And you're hearing immediately just some interesting and it seems like the minute you patch that, you're getting this rhythmic effect, and it's engaging almost like a sequence, right? But the sequence points in between are happening very quickly, and you're hearing overlap of the voices, but you're hearing that I'm able to adjust the pitch of each of these. Right. And then, like our last one, in our last case with mode 2, it was transposing down. In this case, it is taking the frequency lower or higher. And then we get that hold effect. And random step. So there's some similarity of function, at least in terms of the two middle keys between these modes 2 and 3. We could take our ratios. It's going to remind me a little bit of my quad operator, my FM synthesizer voice in my modular setup. Ratios. That's pretty cool. Again, I can go back in. I'm trying to tune these, if you will, kind of opposite of each other, one clockwise, one counterclockwise, to get kind of radical variance, and I could do the same with these. It's kind of a trick I sometimes use on my Lyra 8. When I'm trying to do something dramatic, I might have my voices tuned radically opposite from one another, a high, a low, to get some interesting contrast. What about terminal 1, FM intensity? Boy, it sure is a bear sometimes to get the DuPonts in. We can try different terminals. Kind of cool. And as I've been doing, if I wanted to, I could try to patch some other patch points. And it changes the sound for sure. Again, very usable stuff. I was reading on YouTube some of the comments on one of the Ellitone videos, and someone said, actually it was a comment to me because I had posted a wow comment, and the person said, how are you liking yours? Do you find that it's suited, what kind of music do you find it's suited for? And I said in my response that I think it's really for experimental musicians, but I'd be curious to hear others out there, how you're using it in your setup, what kind of genre of music you create. And yeah, again, that's a pretty cool sound. Tune these all low. Could be too low. Again, a lot of unpredictability working with all of the controls on the Ellitone Multi-Synth. So mode 4 is chirp. And again, one of my goals with this is to not do a deep dive, but to give you a sense of what the different synthesis modes sound like. So to get to our next one, the chirp mode, mode 4, we'll go to this terminal here, the third one over. And these are tuned probably really low. So we'll see what's going on here. Again, I'm going to look at my cheat sheet here just to figure out. It's experimental cosine grain synthesis, and you math folks can tell me what that means. I do remember cosines ages ago. Again, I can right now select my notes. And in this case, this is not... Well, I guess it's functioning as pitch right now. Somewhat. No, actually it's not. So you're hearing then, this first control is what they call window size, and this is cosine grains. And the bass frequency. Oh, we just had a little, heard a buzz there, and then the spread. And these will select the notes. So let's do our rhythm and envelope terminal, which is our fifth one. Making sure everything is patched here correctly. Not hearing anything rhythmic happening. I guess I could continue to patch. Oh yeah, you're hearing subtle rhythm there, huh? Okay. We can patch terminal 1, which is attach envelope to grain number. Now we can attach terminal 4 to one of the headers here, and that is speeds. This is one where I'm not quite following the cheat sheet here in terms of the functions. We can do our last one, which is attach envelope to grain number. And one of the things that Ellitone talks about in creating a synthesizer is that you don't necessarily need to know about synthesis, but obviously if you did know about synthesis and you could understand a little bit under the hood what's going on, that would certainly help you out. So this is one where I'm struggling a little bit to get anything rhythmic from it, but that could just be this particular mode of synthesis. What just happened? Okay, that was weird. I just literally hit something. I felt like I hit this. And now it's doing rhythms. What did I do? Okay. This is like, so you're getting in real time just the nature of the synthesizer, and I love it because I had no idea what I just did, but now I'm getting these cool chirpy little intervals. Wow, okay. Okay, now I totally love that. Again, I don't know what happened. I'll have to watch the tape, but it seems like I hit the chord and it started making those rhythmic patterns. I have no idea what just happened. Again, that gives you, I think, a real sense of the joy of using this instrument is the fact that it has that random, sort of unexplained black box potential behind it, right? Which, yeah, again, could be a good or bad thing depending on where we're coming from musically, sonically. So next one we could do is Infinite Bounce, Mode 5, bouncing ball style sequencer. So we'll go to this terminal here, the fourth over. Okay, and just getting a sense here. These will control the pitches, and then it looks like these will control the bounce times. So I'm assuming I will need, it's showing the fourth terminal is speed presets, so let's patch that and see what happens. Okay, so yeah, we're hearing that. It's actually one of my favorite ones. And these affect the bounce times. You can do the envelope terminal, which is the fifth. And again, experiment different patches. So we just affected there the attack. Yeah, so that's a very short attack and very short release. A little longer release, it sounds like to me. Slow attack. Hard to tell, right? Because you're hearing different pitches. Again, you can kind of dial in something that you like and work from there sonically. Voicing or waveform. Let's try terminal 1, which is waveform, and patch it wherever we like. Getting a square wave sound there. It's like an organ tone. And that's mode 5, infinite bounce. Very cool sounding, as I think you're getting a sense here just of the versatility of the synthesizer. Again, for this price point, you can do a lot with it sonically that you can't with a lot of other smaller modular synths. Now, the Castle, I think, is definitely maybe you could say more controllable as a synthesizer, just because of the fact that you can control gate signals, the speed of it, and so forth with the input and output patch points that are available, which this synthesizer doesn't have. It would be a much different synthesizer if you had something like MIDI in, if you could have a gate in and out. Of course, that would boost the price up, I don't know, maybe $100 or something like that. So let's do the last one, which is our Panic Voice. And according to the instructions, this is data distortion synthesis. Wavetables are smashed together to create overflowing wave data. So this is one that has, I think, up front a very experimental, really all of the waveforms do, or synthesis modes. But we'll patch to our fifth terminal. I was just kind of curious. I took you through all the patching, and I was wondering, since the sixth and last terminal doesn't have a patch point, what would happen if we patched into it? It's pretty interesting because it immediately creates something very strange and rhythmic, and it's almost like it's scaling through various wavetables or synthesis modes. That's pretty cool. That's very kind of Buchla-esque. Anyway, I digress. Let's go back to mode 6. So this is Panic Voice. That is loud. So the first knob here is called Hyperscale. The second is Push and Strength. Get some amazing distortion sounding effects. Modulation envelope and modulation amount. So you're seeing with mode 6 that you could definitely get some incredibly distorted and interesting drones just by dialing in the different sounds that are possible. So let's patch terminal 4, which is speeds. Oh man, we're hitting it here with the frequencies. So this is, I think, by far the most experimental of the voices, the synthesis modes we've experimented with. We can patch the fifth, which is envelopes. Second terminal is voicing. And again, we can adjust as we patch and patch to new places. And then this is note select, which is hard to comprehend given what this is like sonically. And then last is our waveform. Patch that in here. And maybe I just find a sweet spot. Adjust another parameter. And you see just how radical one turn of a knob, one additional patch point, a different patch point can have on the sound. And that's the real fun of the Ellitone Multi-Synth. There's nothing like it, really, in a lot of ways. Maybe save my Folk Tech gear in terms of creating these radical sounds on the fly. Yeah, so those are the 6 modes to look at. Again, unaffected sound here, just giving you a sense of what you might expect when you start to dig in with the Ellitone. Okay, so now we'll get into the sonic examples, and I'll give you 8 selections of different tracks recorded in different ways using the Ellitone in some way, often through an effects unit, in some cases connected with other Eurorack or semi-modular instruments, as well as the Soma pipe in a public performance that I'm offering for you. So 2 tips to offer today. One is to make sure that you download the patch diagram information with the 6 modes. I think it'll help you figuring out exactly what's going on. The second tip is actually going to contradict this by saying just to experiment with things. Once you figure out that the middle terminal on the Ellitone is selecting your 6 different modes or unpatched mode 1, then you can begin to experiment beyond that. Or just for fun, you'll see this in one sonic demo here coming up. Just patch DuPont cables wherever you like them and don't even think about what exactly is being triggered. So that's kind of a fun way to approach things. So I think you'll hear in these sonic examples different approaches, but there is some similarity because I tend to think that the Ellitone really lends itself well for experimental and more aggressive music. I'll give you a couple examples of ambient music. I don't really create that kind of sound, like a more new age sound or atmospheric soundscapes, but you could certainly do it using the Ellitone if you think about approaching the patching in certain ways and using the instrument in some of its possible parameters. So in terms of the sonic examples, you'll just see these numbered 1 through 8. The first 2 really, I think, show you a very brutal and aggressive side, which is very experimental for me and really key to a lot of the tracks that I do that you'll find on my YouTube channel here, in addition to these reviews and discussions of electronic music. Certainly the Folk Tech gear, including the mescaline, which I have just behind here, is really in line with the aggressive sound of the Ellitone. Now again, for around $100, you're not going to get anywhere near the patching capabilities of the Folk Tech mescaline, but it definitely has a much different sound than the mescaline. And so you could certainly think about how this particular instrument might be used in your particular compositions. So when you get to the third example that I've labeled for you, it's a more ambient track, and that is also shared in example 7, which starts off ambient. I do some patching. I use the albedo reverb, the Cinevibes, which is a really good reverb here on the Korg NTS1. And by the way, pairing these two together is wonderful, and I think you'll see that if you're doing a desktop setup and doing a performance, you can certainly have the Ellitone along with the Korg NTS-1 and some other small desktop gear and really have a powerful opportunity to create some great music and experimental soundscapes. So example 4 takes us back to that kind of brutal realm of really showing the aggressive side of the Ellitone. And a lot of this is running through the various effects of the Korg NTS-1. And, you know, kind of there's an old joke that with big reverbs, sometimes things sound really great. But again, that's kind of the nature of thinking about how to pair instruments with effects and other opportunities within your gear setup, whatever that looks like. Now, track 5 will be that track with the pipe, and so you'll see a diagram at the end of that track of the entire setup. I basically had things rubber band to a board, and I was on board a cruise ship, and so I did this short performance using the Soma pipe, and I had some effects units, and then this was the primary rhythm background. It's a trick I found with the Ellitone, is creating these squawky, glitchy sounds that are sort of really almost incoherent in terms of their approach, and you'll kind of hear that. And it reminds me a little bit of how you can cycle through sound banks on a lot of Eurorack modules using whatever modulation source you want. In particular, when I think of something like the Moffensief Muskrat, some of the sounds here remind me of the Muskrat in terms of that glitchiness and some of those pure waves as they're distorted with wave shaping and FN modulation and so forth. So I think the Ellitone, has a lot of potential to be an experimental soundscape for you because it has a very aleatoric or randomized sound to it. I think as we'll pick up in example number 5, which is that pipe performance, which I hope you enjoy. Example 6, I wanted to see if I could pair the Ellitone with some of my Eurorack gear in a synchronous sense. And what I mean by that is, could I create any meaningful clocking situations or even envelope follower situations that would allow me to trigger my gear externally into my Eurorack modules? And so what I did was I ran using just a splitter here, a multiplier. I ran another audio out from the Ellitone into the mutable elements clone that I have. So I created a sound there. You can kind of listen to it and think if you see it, if it syncs up. I think it has a certain sort of polyrhythmic presence to it, but I, again, wouldn't recommend this instrument for anything involving clocking and synchronization. That is really not going to work as you're going to gather. And that's perfectly fine. Again, every piece of gear we have has a different purpose. So it's not in any way a knock on the Ellitone. It's just a realization of what it can and can't do. I mentioned already example 7, which starts at an ambient level and then goes into the more noisy realms. And then track 8, I think, is my favorite one in this selection of sonic examples because it was an attempt to use the Ellitone and then to layer on top of it various Eurorack modules using a number of them, the Morphogene, Folktech Mescaline, Folktech Matter, using IntelliGel's Plonk, using the Erica Sense Black DSP2, using the Ventris Dual Reverb, and some other modules. And so it was one where I think it shows you the potential of using any number of sounds here, whether they're more ambient or whether they're more sequence, glitchy kind of sequences, and then layering on top of it. And you could certainly do that in a live performance or in your studio tracks. So the fact that you can't do a lot of clock in and out here really at all is okay if you think about using the Ellitone in this other way, creating soundscapes and a backing track, if you will. It reminds me almost of an experimental Shruti box, and of course the Shruti box is more of a drone instrument, but I'm specifically thinking of this idea that you could have an instrument that's playing sequence material that can be adjusted very quickly, the timbres can be changed, the rhythms can be changed, and you have this opportunity to improvise on top of that, which was that point of the pipe performance, which you'll hear. So I will just play these in their entirety now, and you're welcome again to use the time index and jump around as you get bored or as you get excited, play them again and so forth. And I hope you enjoy some of the sounds here coming from the Ellitone Multi-Synth. All right, so that is it today. I hope you enjoyed the review here of the Ellitone Multi-Synth. Absolutely one of my favorite synthesizers. It doesn't look like much in some respects if you look at how it's constructed, but it sounds absolutely amazing, and it's really wonderful for a desktop musical performance series like my microenvironment series. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more music reviews in the future.